So we are doing another one of our wellness webinars. We had kind of back to back a lot of heavy stuff, right? We took you through the liver and the brain and the kidneys and all those organ related things. And so now today we're going to talk about something hopefully I feel like is a little bit simpler to digest, if I could use my food pun, and that's thinking outside the cereal box. So we're going to talk a little bit about traditional foods or how to make healthier choices when it comes to your first meal of the day, the importance of that, what some of the research is saying about this too, and give you some insight into even some of the things that I do and what the rest of the globe does. We also, I think for the first time ever, I had a handout that was related to this. So if you went and registered on the portal, it should be there. If not, I'm going to send a copy of it to Matthew just so you can kind of have like at a glance some of the points of today's conversation around that. So when we're done, hopefully these are the objectives that you take away. You know, obviously I'm a dietitian, not your dietitian. Everything that we do on these wellness webinars are just for informational and educational purposes, but please make sure you're checking with your own personal healthcare providers before you do anything, start or stop anything differently when it comes to your own health. Okay, so my name, if we've never met before, is Dina D'Alessandro. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I own and operate a part-time private practice in Lower East Side, Manhattan, New York City. I also sometimes will work from my Ocean County, New Jersey residence as well. And I'm also the campus dietitian at Lehman College, where I went back to school to do what I'm doing now. I got my degree as a Master of Science in Nutrition through Lehman College in the Bronx, and I am the dietitian at the Student Health Center there. I also am an adjunct professor of graduate and undergraduate nutrition studies. I'm going on, I think it's 8 years now of teaching, 6 years of campus counseling, and 9 years of being a dietitian. So I feel very fortunate that I've been able to work with so many diverse populations and so many different life cycles and so many different chronic conditions. And I really do try my best to stay on top of the research. I mean, it's part of what I do as a dietitian. I have to maintain certain credits to make sure I'm always being current with my professional development, and doing things like this make me really happy. So thank you again for inviting me into your space. So one of the things that I'd like to ask you, you know, when we think of the American way that we approach breakfast, sometimes we think of something like cereal or yogurt or oatmeal. What is your current go-to breakfast, or is it none? Like, you know, when you define breakfast as a first meal of the day, is it something that you are eating? Is it just coffee? Feel free to throw in the chat if you would like to share. Matthew, same for you too, if you want to throw it in the chat or speak out. I'll share a little bit about mine, and I'm actually going to show you later on too some of examples of things. I call myself a three-trick pony. I tend to do smoothies on rotation, some kind of egg on rotation, and some kind of oatmeal concoction on rotation. And that's usually my Monday through Friday. Saturday is a little up in the air. Sometimes whatever I feel I hadn't had enough of, I'll do on Saturday. And then Sunday, we always go out for bagels. I always pick up bagels from the bagel shop around here. So that's my current go-to breakfast. There we go. Okay, boiled egg on toast, some butter and jelly on a bagel. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, everyone. And then what do you consider a non-traditional breakfast? Like, what's something that you would consider something that you've had recently or whenever you can remember of a non-traditional food item or a breakfast? Like you can see on screen here, I have a picture of beans and vegetables and the sausage, and it's like very, very hearty. And a lot of people wouldn't necessarily include something like that in a traditional American diet. So is there anything that you can think of that you had recently or that you would call a non-traditional breakfast that you've eaten? And while you're putting that in the chat or as you're thinking of it, something that comes to mind for me. So I don't eat like this, but my heritage in Italy, they do eat like this. And the last time I was in Italy about 6 years ago, we went on this 8 mile hike. It was part of a fundraiser weekend for breast cancer. And when we returned from the hike on the way down, the coordinators were telling us, when we come back from the hike, there's going to be a breakfast set up. The people from the community have organized a little, tables full of stuff. So when we get down there, we'll be able to eat. And I was like, oh, thank goodness, because I'm starving. Okay, so if you know anything about Italian food, the first meal of the day is very, very light. It was biscotti, which is basically just a cookie and espresso, which is like a black coffee. And I was really thinking I was going to have eggs and something hearty. I was so hungry. So that did not strike me as filling enough, but that was a non-traditional type of meal in their world. That's very traditional for them. On me, not so much. Okay, thank you for sharing. Thank you. Deli meats for breakfast. Thank you. All right, so in here, I want to share a little bit about what we're going to see in the coming slides. So the science, the research that I'm sharing with you of what is helping support our morning time. So again, assuming whatever time you wake up, the first meal of the day, what that can help you with as far as energy needs are concerned. Also some information related to mood and cognitive function. If you remember our brain health webinar not too long ago, that was a discussion we had about food and relation to our cognition. And also a discussion around blood sugars, whether or not you are diagnosed with diabetes or not. Blood sugar plays a role in a lot of stuff that we do. So let's start first talking about morning energy. When we talk about the word energy, if you remember from our macros and micros discussion a while back, energy equals calories. I always say this is like the quantity of your food. You see the little car there, right? It's like putting gas in your car. It's the stuff that's getting you kick-started to get moving throughout the day. And it's also nice to have a first meal that does that. So we'll talk a little bit too about what that first meal might consist of. It also helps with what's known as metabolism. Metabolism is just a fancy way of saying how our body uses the food that we are ingesting in order to function. Brain, moving my arms, my heartbeat, my breath, and being able just to have activity throughout the day. Obviously, when you hear the word breakfast, yeah, it's breakfast. It's fasting overnight and you're breaking that fast. So it helps with starting off the next day. And it can also help us keep efficient. So we do encourage, morning food or a first meal, just kind of kickstart that a little bit. And I always like relating it to, as I mentioned before, with similar, I don't know how many people have cars in New York, but similar to fueling up a vehicle, the vehicle is your body, with some sort of energy to get you through the next amount of hours or so. When it comes to mood, cognition, focus, we do see that having that first meal, or really food of any kind in the earlier part of the day, can help with supporting our overall brain health. It can also help with helping us focus and relieve any sluggishness, especially if you're waking up, you're feeling a little bit tired, not very well rested. It's nice to have something in your body just to kind of kickstart that activity or that and get that energy going. It can also help with improving our concentration, our memory, our problem solving skills. If you remember from the brain health discussion as well, we talked about all of these things, tactile ways that we do stuff, word puzzles, and of course, food plays a role in that as well, of making sure that it's supporting that. Next up here, we have in relationship to blood sugar. So again, how we define that, we talked a little bit more about this in detail with the diabetes awareness and prevention webinar from a while back. But like I said, not everybody has, if you're not currently diagnosed with or managing a formal diagnosis of diabetes, blood sugar is still an issue with all of us. It's how our hormones kind of kickstart and wake up throughout the day, how things are regulated, and also the other activities that are involved with hunger and feeding ourselves, right? So we talk about spikes and drops, cravings and crashes, getting hangry, part of that mood as well, or slowing down and finding that sluggishness later on in the day. If we haven't fed ourselves enough over the course of time in the first part of the day, then we might start feeling a little bit slower and sluggish. And that's our blood sugar dropping. We're having like a low glycemic episode. The blood sugar is dropping. So that's why I like telling people front load your calories. However that feels for you, get something in your body first thing in the morning or within a few hours of waking up, because that's most likely the most active time of your day, and that can help with stabilizing those blood sugars. When I meet and talk to a lot of the people that I meet and talk to, a lot of these things that you see on screen here come up when it comes to that first meal. So there's barriers that exist, and we'll talk about more specifically in the coming slides of what that means. So something like time constraints. We recognize that not everybody can fit in preparing something from scratch first thing in the morning, or you're rushing to get out the door for something, or maybe you're purposely trying to get quality sleep, so you don't really want to have a lot of time for like your morning routine, and that's totally fine. If you want to include a morning meal or something to kind of kickstart your day, I recommend preparing ahead. So maybe the night before or the Sunday before your week begins, seeing what's available for you when you're getting ready the night before, considering what you have on hand and putting some things together. If it's helpful for you to do something like batch cooking, making things in larger quantities and packing them up and freezing them or putting them in the fridge, this way you can kind of grab and go as you go. First thing in the morning, it alleviates having that friction of forcing yourself to do one more responsibility right after waking up. And then some of the examples here, like easy grab and go options, you have maybe a little container that you can put overnight oats in, or you make a chia pudding, which again might be oatmeal, or a yogurt concoction that you're adding some seeds or chia seeds to. Or you could even do like a pre-made purchased breakfast burrito, something that's wrapped up and frozen that you can kind of heat and eat the next day. And I'll share with you some examples of what I do for either prep ahead or the grab and go type of things. As we age, this is very common, and it's common in a lot of people in general, the appetite issue. I'm not hungry. I don't know when I want to eat. Just because your body doesn't necessarily give you the cue that says, "Oh, I should be eating something," doesn't mean that you still shouldn't have something to eat. So a recommendation that we make for this is setting a timer, right? Maybe when you wake up, you set a timer for about 30 to 60 to 90 minutes later to make sure that you have some sort of food or first meal in your body. So this is quite common, and as I said, as we age, just naturally our body tends to kind of shut off that hunger cue. Or if you are on a regimen of medicines, that could also affect your appetite as well. It might suppress some things, or you might not feel very like wanting to have things that are appetizing. So as an example, some things that you can include in that first meal could be something very small and somewhat balanced. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. Something like a handful of nuts and some fruit. Or if you are planning on eating a little heartier later on in the day, maybe you have a few bites of what you've made for yourself ahead of time, and or maybe something like a smoothie. Take a couple sips of that, and you're going to eat the rest of it later on. What I've come to see is for people who don't normally do this by nature, as they kind of get more accustomed to creating a structure around that, like having cues be gone, but implementing some sort of timing, like at 7:30, at 2:30, at 7 o'clock at night, I'm going to make myself sit down and eat something. Sometimes their appetite does come back. Sometimes they'll see that their body does adjust to that. The next thing I want to note, make mention of too, is medication timing. So I just got done talking about if you're on meds or regimens of medications. It's possible that you can't eat during your before or during your taking your meds, or you might be told you should be eating your food while you're taking your medication. So obviously, please make sure that you're checking with the insert of the packaging of what it's recommending, or you're speaking with your pharmacist or your doctor about that. Sometimes you're told to take your meds on an empty stomach. I believe Synthroid, I think, is one of those that's like that if you're dealing with thyroid issues, or you might have to wait about 30 to 60 minutes before the timing of your meal to have your food. I was also I just wrote something down that I made a note in front of me here that I was also recently told about levodopa. Levodopa is the medicine for Parkinson's disease for people who are managing the earlier stages of that, that there's actually a protein timing criteria. So it's not so much about you can't eat something with it, it's you can't eat protein with it. So much of the recommendations that you'll see coming up where I do talk about that balance of foods and including proteins and fats and carbs. In a case like levodopa, please make sure that you're talking to your doctor to figure out what can or cannot be eaten within a certain amount of time of taking that the medication, because there could be a counter indication of that you shouldn't be including a particular food ingredient or food group with that. So obviously, like I said before, if you're unsure, make sure you're reading the labels or discussing that with your pharmacist or your doctor. Okay, the next thing coming up is fasting. So I get this a lot too. Obviously, in the case of religious purposes, I'm not going to have any insight into things like this. You do whatever your dietary laws are making you do as far as religious observations there. But a lot of times I'll get people asking me stuff about intermittent fasting. And I think we might have talked about this in a while back too. A lot of that is very much focused or rooted in the weight management discussions, and I tend to take a much more neutral approach. So I don't encourage any kind of offsetting of meals, but if that's something that you enjoy doing, that's totally your preference. What I just want to point out here is there are certain populations that I would just be really careful with if you're implementing a fasting preference. So we're talking about people who don't eat until a certain time within a certain window and restrict some of their calories within that. So if people have had a history of eating disorders or disordered eating. Things like fasting and putting themselves on kind of like a restricted regimen can definitely trigger some more of those disordered behaviors. Or if somebody is recovering from those eating disorders, it could hinder or worsen their recovery. Children and teens. So if you're taking care of kids, grandkids, whatever, we want to make sure we're modeling things. So if they're looking to you and you're implementing this type of approach to food, or someone else in their household is, it might not also be applicable to them because they're still growing and their caloric needs are much different than those of us who are older. They have different energy needs and consistent intake. Same thing goes with anyone in your family or your circles who might be pregnant or breastfeeding. They will also need extra nutrients because of the breastfeeding or the pregnancy. So again, we don't necessarily recommend adhering to some sort of fasting schedule for that. We talked too about diabetes and heart conditions and things along those lines. I'm noticing some research that contradicts what I'm about to say. Sometimes we do see some benefits with certain things, but I think this is also a case-by-case situation and working with a healthcare provider and a dietitian to determine what's working best for you. So especially if you're dealing with blood sugar and you're taking your finger sticks and you're noticing spikes and drops, you may or may not benefit from certain fasting approaches, but usually the recommendation is not to, because we don't want you dropping too low and becoming low glycemic, low blood sugar in that sense. And then anyone who might be considered chronically ill or underweight, again, we don't want to stop them from eating. So having more specific timing of foods and having something in the earlier part of the day just kind of give themselves the needs that they have. And I already mentioned the thing about the medication timing as well as things that might be barriers, but we want to address. Okay, now we'll discuss some of the myths that sometimes come up around these things too. Like I said, most of this is around people who are doing searches online for weight management. So I'll just address some of these things. Is breakfast the most important meal of the day? Maybe, but I would, argue that all food is important. So how we define breakfast can be whatever I just said. It's the first meal. It's something that kickstarts. It breaks the fast from overnight. But all foods fit and all foods can be flexible and free if you have the ability to do that and have control over your food. And so all foods could be important in that sense. It's not necessarily a must approach, right? I think I've mentioned a lot of times in some of these past conversations, I try very hard not to say something black or white. It's a lot of, it depends. It depends. So it's not like you must eat or you have to eat or you have to follow these rules and regulations. 30 minutes of waking up, it's okay to have some flexibility around it. It really is what you feel benefits you, but still meets the requirements of your energy needs and anything that you happen to be managing if there's a chronic condition involved. So again, skipping breakfast, I don't necessarily recommend, but having something small, if you don't like to sit down with a large meal, that's okay too. The second to last bullet there that you see, carbs and proteins shouldn't be eaten together at breakfast. I don't believe that that's true. What I have come across in research, and I think I've mentioned this in some of the past webinars, and I'll share a little bit more about this today too, is that balance, the carbs, the fats, and the protein. Never eat a naked carb on an empty stomach. So it's helpful not to spike that blood sugar. And it's not necessarily that carbs and proteins can't be eaten together, but more about having a protein source or a fiber-rich food or something that is a healthy fat to kind of kickstart that digestion, to kind of slow that down. So in other words, if you're on an empty stomach and you eat a carbohydrate first, it's an immediate source of energy. It's going to be very quick pick up, take off, metabolization of being utilized in your body, so you could get that spike and that drop. If you start first with maybe a protein source or together with a protein source or a healthy fat, it's kind of like I say, it's enrobed in it, right? So it slows the digestion and it can help you keep fuller a little bit longer. And then that last bullet that says bigger breakfasts are always better. I don't necessarily agree with that either. It's not necessarily meaning it's healthier. Again, it could be an approach to front load the calories, but I would again decide what is the definition around that. Is it an 800 calorie meal first thing in the morning? That can actually work opposite. It can actually make you feel super, super full and cause your body to rest and digest. So you almost go into like a Thanksgiving, food coma after you're eating something really, really big. So I tend to say, spread it out over the course of the day. Maybe front load your calories so you're eating a little bit heartier during your most active periods of time and a little bit lighter as you're getting to the day when you're about to go to sleep. So again, no real hard fast rules, anything. Before I go on to this slide, though, a lot of times I like just acknowledging what we call the social determinants of health, meaning that not every individual is necessarily in control of their health outcomes based on the environmental factors around them. So you might not have access to quality, affordable foods. You might not have nutritionally dense things available in your supermarket or grocery stores or wherever you're picking up things. And recently, I want to recognize and acknowledge the discussion around budget, especially if you're on a fixed income. You might not have access to certain things, or you might have certain times where you can purchase things, or you might be on supplemental nutrition assistance. So whether you're working with a dietitian or a case manager or a social worker, or you're reaching out and utilizing community resources like maybe religious organizations that give free meals or a food pantry, there might not always be the healthiest options there. So I just want to say, whatever is within your control, we acknowledge that. If it's not in your control, we acknowledge that as well, because there's only so much that you can do. But if you are able to take into account some of what I'm about to share with you, it could be more budget friendly. So making things from scratch or a homemade version of something is usually a little bit more budget friendly than always eating out and doing takeout. We talked a while back, I think in March this year and last year, we did the National Nutrition Month discussion around sustainability and food waste. So inventorying what's on hand, you already paid for it. Don't let it go to waste and don't let it be thrown out. So even if it doesn't feel like a traditional breakfast, maybe you take down some options or you pull something out from the back of your freezer that's still sitting there, and that becomes your breakfast or a meal for the day. Other things too, we've mentioned also nutritionally dense foods don't always have to be fresh and seasonal and locally grown. There could be frozen and canned options that are more budget friendly, and they're just as nutritious because they're packaged quickly. It's just a matter of reading those food labels to make sure that there's nothing extra added in it, like high salt, fat, or sugar content, where that could, offset your healthy approaches to that. Protein sources and other food items that are considered budget friendly or come out to about $1 or less per serving. And again, when I say this out loud, it's hard for me to make this sound logical, because it's not like you can just buy one egg, right? You have to buy a dozen eggs. But if you're buying a dozen eggs, you might consider buying also a carton of egg whites. And this way you're kind of like extending that shelf life or that availability. So you're doing one egg and one egg white, and maybe the carton of egg whites are a little bit more cost beneficial, and you can extend the amount of stuff that you have on hand as far as your inventory is concerned to make it last a little longer and still get the benefits of protein that you need or the food that you need. So meat and animal products are always going to be a little bit more expensive than the plant-based versions of things, but see what's on sale. Maybe there's canned foods, canned fish, if you like tofu, beans, lentils, dried goods, whole grains, all of these things could be included in what counts as breakfast. And even things like non-fat dairy, or I should say non-fat dry milk, right? Like the powdered stuff that you could use in place of a protein powder. So you're adding things like that into your smoothies. My understanding is that when dairy farmers sell their dairy, their product, the price is based on the butterfat content. So a whole milk is going to be more expensive than a 1% or a fat-free. So, again, pick and choose what you feel is most appropriate for you, what is helpful towards your diet and your budget. That's helpful to come into play when it comes to making your first meal or any meal of the day. So here, what you see on screen here is a little bit of an insight of what I'm going to go into more detail. If you remember from the healthy aging blue zones discussion we had, oh gosh, I think that might have been even last year, maybe September, October of last year. When we look across the globe, we see certain things that are factors within people's first meals. We, again, in relationship to Americans' food or diet, we see things that are considered beyond the traditional food sources, so things that could be integrated into our meals and be inspired by that. We also notice that they have a more mindful approach to things, so they're taking things into portion appropriate sizes, and they're also recognizing, okay, you know what, I think I'm good, I'm going to step away, I'm kind of full right now, because a lot of their food is also plant-based, so there's a lot of hearty, fibrous foods there that help keep them full, and also there's protein sources in there too with regulating those blood sugar spikes and dropping, and also keeping that fullness factor, that satiety, what we call satiety or satisfaction factor as well. So a quick internet search on screen here, you can see a bunch of thumbnails. They're quite small, so I'm not going to make you force yourself to look at this. I'm going to go a little bit deeper in a second. But I love this because, number one, there's so many different things that are available in here that I've never seen before. Number two, being that we live and work in New York City, I think this is kind of like a nod and a respectful approach of the wonderful diversity that we do have in the cultures in our boroughs. And that's a little bit of everything here. So, maybe next time you're in a different neighborhood, you might want to check out what those traditional meals are and enjoy something that you might not have enjoyed before. So here too, if you want to enter in the chat, if any of these things look familiar to you or things that you're already implemented as a first meal, feel free to add it in the chat. I'm going to spotlight a few things. I think shakshuka, I think a lot of people know what shakshuka is. I could be wrong. This is a Northern African dish. It is egg based, so there's poached eggs in there in a very flavorful, spicy tomato broth or a tomato and pepper sauce. It's typically served hot, and it's also served with some crusty bread for dipping. I love shakshuka. So tell me in the chat if this is something that you recognize or you've eaten before. Next up, we have something called nasi lemak. This is a fragrant Malaysian rice dish. Again, when we look at the globe, a lot of the cultures include grain-based or rice as staples, these types of foods as staple items in their meals. So in the case of Malaysia, they have a rice dish cooked in coconut milk. They have something known as pandan leaves. So this is what's known as the Asian vanilla. It's like a fragrant, again, the fragrance, smokiness, or the kind of the flavor component that they add to it can be used in both sweet and savory dishes. So if you have different kinds of spice stores in your neighborhood, this might be something that you're interested in making for yourself. And this is also usually served with accompaniments known as sambal, which is a spicy chili paste off to the right there in that little cup, fried anchovies. So they have some fish options in there too. Again, bringing the protein source in there. Sometimes they'll do peanuts, cucumber, and sometimes they'll do a boiled egg as well. So that's known as nasi lemak. Next up, a very simple kind of bagel bread item. This is Greek. So this kind of reminds me of what I was telling you before when I was in Italy in the cookie and the coffee type of breakfast. So this is known as kaluri. This is a Greek bagel or a bread ring. They usually have the sesame seeds on top, which add texture and healthy fat to this particular food item. It's a street food that they often eat as well. It's got a crispy exterior and a soft, chewy interior. And then here we have something known as ackee and saltfish. This is a Jamaican dish. So if you're from Jamaica or you've ever eaten Jamaican food, this might look very familiar to you. This is a national dish. Ackee is a national fruit in this region, popular also in Caribbean cuisine overall. And so even though it's a fruit, it does act sometimes as a vegetable source. So they can use it in sweet or savory dishes. And then you have what is known as saltfish or salt cod. In Italy, salt cod is known as bacala. In Spanish cultures, it's known as bacalao. So again, maybe the names look a little bit different, but when you're looking at the food, it looks kind of familiar to you. So this dish is served, I think you can see in here, it's sauteed onions and peppers, tomatoes, seasonings, greens over in the back, and usually also served with dumplings or other side dishes as well. That looks very hearty. And last thing that I wanted to kind of focus on as an example of food from around the globe, this is known as idli. This is a southern Indian dish. Also, sometimes we see this in Sri Lanka and those types of regions. Savory rice cake or a rice patty, and it's a popular breakfast food. And again, they have some condiments on the side. So just kind of widening our examples of foods from around the world, of breakfast items, and maybe getting you excited to try new things as you build a breakfast for yourself. So when we talk about building a better breakfast, what we're talking about are what you see in front of you. And I'll reiterate some of the stuff that I just mentioned as well. Balance, how we define balance is in the quality and the quantity. So we're talking about carbs and fats and proteins. Those are known as your macronutrients. That's what's giving you the calories or the energy that you need to be able to be active and move around. And then we have the vitamins and minerals in the micronutrients, and that gives you the quality of the food, the things that allow our cells to function on a much deeper level. So this is why when we talk about, it doesn't have to be every single meal, but we talked about in past webinars too, of diversifying the diet, of having a little bit of everything. So even if you tend to be more of a picky or selective eater, take a look at kind of like the foods that you enjoy that feel safe, or if you're managing a chronic condition, especially like kidney health, there's a lot of things that kind of come off that list, but some things that are really good for you that can stay on. See what is maybe needing to be added to something where you can add some color, some texture, some variety. And as you aim for that balance and that diversity, then most likely you'll be hitting everything that you need in that that meal to give you what you need in that meal. The next thing is kind of a rule that I like to share is 100 calories equals about an hour's worth of energy. So again, taking into account if it's a balanced meal where you have a little bit of everything, it could work out in that way that it could keep you a little fuller longer. And so if you have something like a quick grab and go item, maybe like a yogurt, uh, oatmeal, a hard-boiled egg, that might be 100 calories in itself. That's your first meal. So especially if you're not sure about timing of things or when your next meal is going to be, or you have some appetite issues, I tend to say set a timer. Set a timer for about an hour or 2 hours after that, and that probably will indicate your body naturally starting to want to be getting to be hungry again. If you have a heartier meal, about a 400 or 500 calorie meal, a little bit heartier, you're adding more variety in there, a little bit more balanced, a little bit heavier in the actual weight of the content of the foods, then you might realize, okay, I can last about 4 or 5 hours going forward where I'm not going to be hungry again until it's time for me to have lunch. So this is just kind of a nice rule of thumb. If you're kind of a picker throughout the day, this is how you can kind of regulate the timing of what you're eating, and also recognizing that the balance of the foods within it. So like I said, if it's a hard-boiled egg for 100 calories versus just a piece of apple at 100 calories, the egg is probably going to make you feel a little fuller longer because of the protein and the fat, whereas the apple is the same amount of calories, but it's mostly the carbs in there, so you might feel hungrier sooner. So maybe adding some nuts or adding some yogurt to it to kind of balance it out might help with working on it. And again, using that car analogy of fueling up, how long do you have to go? How much action is happening in your life during the day to figure out how many calories from hour to hour and from meal to meal. And then last on here, which I'll show a little bit more in detail as to how I implement this. If you remember our meal planning webinar, we talked about stuff like this. It's important to just, zoom out and take a look as to what you're eating, when you're eating, and how you're eating it. So when it comes to planning ahead, you're taking a look again of the events in your day, of the timing of the structure. And when it comes to prepping ahead, it's about the actual ingredients. Am I going grocery shopping? Am I picking stuff up at the food pantry? Am I going to have to slice and dice or pre-cook anything and kind of, sacrifice a couple of hours in a certain day of the week in order to get things ahead of time? And so obviously that recommendation is for all of the foods, but for our purposes today, we're talking also specifically about the breakfast components or the first meal components of it. So same recommendations apply there. So I'll share with you next up on these slides coming up. You might have seen this because I use this slide in, I think, the meal planning discussion. I don't love the font in here, so I apologize if it's a little hard to read. But you can see, right, the top, I'm the three-trick pony. The eggs, the avocado and toast, whatever, the oatmeal, the smoothie, etc. That's on rotation. And then we usually have bagels on Sunday. And then in this particular example, I'm going to brunch on Saturday, right? So I know what I'm eating for my first meals, and I just quickly kind of scribble that down. And then depending on the heartiness of the first meal, that will maybe determine what my second and third meals might be. Or my third meal as dinner time, I might end up having some leftovers that I can use the next day. And then I maybe make it a little bit lighter in the morning that I don't have as much of a hearty breakfast. Again, my schedules might be a little bit different than yours. I have a very erratic schedule. I don't work 9 to 5, and I have a variety of different things that I do each week, whether I'm teaching in school or doing private practice stuff. So sometimes I get breaks and sometimes I don't. And sometimes I need to bring some snacks with me and sometimes I don't. But I think scribbling something like this down is just kind of like an indication, just acknowledging I have fed myself a certain particular way over the course of the day and the course of the week. And then I know what I need to buy or replenish or prepare ahead of time in that sense. All right, so I'm going to give you some examples here too. Again, some of these pictures I might have shared with you before. So here's an example. I like eggs. If you don't like eggs, that's okay. You can do something different. If I have the time like I did this morning, I'll make eggs from scratch and I'll sit down and I'll eat them hot. If I don't, I'll do something like this. This is just a vegetable quiche. You could also do something like this in muffin cups, like muffin tins, and then you just pop them out as you go. My freezer is not very big, so if I do something like this, it gets wrapped up separately and stuck in the fridge. I also don't have a microwave, so I either have to use the toaster oven, or I don't mind eating something like this at room temperature. I'm totally fine with it. But again, this is preparation in advance, a first meal, kind of hearty, satisfying, and it's well balanced. It has a bunch of different things in it that I feel can apply to the recommendations I made before. Next example, my joke is always whenever I have a smoothie, it's like I've mowed a lawn with my face. So yeah, mine are a little bit greener than maybe some other people's might be, but this also is a representation of those recommendations of balancing a meal. So I'm not just having a smoothie on an empty stomach that is just fruit, like pineapple or mango or coconut water. It's not that. You can see from bottom to top. I have sliced up about a quarter or half of an avocado on the bottom. I have some raw leafy greens on the second level of it there. I do put some peanut butter in there, so nut butter or sunflower butter or anything that you want as far as like a healthy fat, or some seeds can go in there too if that's an option for you. I have fresh strawberries that are in this picture, but sometimes I use frozen blueberries or a frozen banana or something kind of nice and cold that adds a little bit more of that sweetness to it. And then in here, I think I only did water, but sometimes I'll do water or I'll do almond milk, or I'll even sometimes put a scoop of protein powder in it if I need a little extra, depending again on the timing of the day and how I want to kind of feel or extend that fullness factor. So that's an example of my smoothie. And then here's an example of my oatmeal. So my oatmeal is just a tear off little pouch in a box of, instant oatmeal packages. I usually just boil water and use that to cook the instant oatmeal, but then I also stir in some nuts or nut butter. And sometimes I'll add a dollop of yogurt, or like I have a vanilla Siggy's version that I feel is palatable enough so it's not super tangy. And sometimes maybe I'll put a spoon of cottage cheese, because again, I don't necessarily mind those tastes and flavors together, but if you don't love that, just an example of how you can, deconstruct something if you want to do something similar but different. And then here again, we have a handful of berries represented too, and a little cup of coffee. So it's not just plain oatmeal. It's not just a fruit smoothie. It's not just eggs. It's eggs plus vegetables. It's a smoothie plus the avocado. It's this plus the nuts. So things that extend that fullness factor, kickstart that morning meal for me, and also provide that balance that I need to help with all of the activities that I'm doing, the brain power that I'm dealing with, and helping me with stabilizing those blood sugar levels as well. So I'm not crashing and getting hangry, as they call it, as the day progresses. All right, I'm going to check in the chat if there's anything that popped up in while I was talking just now. I don't see anything in there. And believe it or not, this is kind of the end of our discussion. You know how I always like to ask you the takeaways of when we do these webinars. Maybe this is something that is validating for you already. Maybe this is just breathing new life and letting you recommit to things that you're already doing. So you're going to keep doing the things that you're doing. Maybe this gave you some options or some helpful hints as to how to start putting things together to either kickstart that morning meal for yourself, or grab something even if you're not feeling super hungry and you don't recognize the appetite cues. Or maybe you stop doing something that no longer serves you, and check out other things around you and get inspired by some of the foods and the cultures and the I hope the inspiration that I've given you in this webinar today. Please.
You touched on a couple of these things, but
Yeah,
I'm very curious why. Now, this is for me, but obviously it's true for other people too.
sure.
That sometimes if I just have a piece of toast, I feel full. And you were talking about the Italian breakfast, right? It's just
Yeah,
like a roll or something,
yeah,
and people feel full. But other times, I'll have oatmeal, right? Which is, I guess it's carbs and it's much thicker, but I'll eat that and I'll feel hungry. I feel
yeah,
like it doesn't do it.
yeah. I'm gonna say, as I said before, I feel like everything is always quote unquote, it depends. So when you're looking at the wheat-based products or flour-based products, depending on the type of flour that they're using, like if it's semolina bread or whole wheat bread, the gluten that forms within those things is a protein source, and it kind of can act like as an elasticity substance too. So that could potentially keep you fuller longer. If it's a grain-based food item, just as far as macronutrients are concerned, it's an immediate source of energy. So it could also be how you are physically active or not as active. So it could last a little longer because you're not moving around as much, or if you have been active, or if for whatever reason your body's undergoing stress and it's kind of like utilizing and metabolizing, it's processing those foods a lot quicker than you're normally used to. And you wouldn't necessarily know that other than the hunger and the fullness factor kind of kicking in and being like, that's interesting. Um, that could be a reason why. And I agree with you. There are times where I say to myself, oh my gosh, I stacked up a piece of toast, an avocado, two fried eggs, and I'm still starving. Like, what is happening? And other times I could eat something really small and I'm like, oof, I'm full. So I think
Yeah.
it's just a case by case basis. It has to do with, stress hormones, physical activity levels, anything, blood sugar up and down, like hormone stuff related to that too. So it could be an individual approach to things. And so, some of the as I say, the language that I'm using, it's recommendation and guidance. It doesn't mean it's a hard, fast rule for anybody to adhere to. So kind of, whatever you feel is necessary. If you feel like I need to go back and have seconds or add something to it because I'm still hungry, have the freedom to do that. If you think, this is enough for today, I'm good, then that's totally up to you. Yeah. Thank you for that question, by the way. It's true. It happens. I don't know the phenomenon behind it all.
But
Oh, Karen. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, before we get to that, so you have like the stereotypical lumberjack, right?
Right.
And that breakfast would be pancakes, right? Which would
Right.
be just carbs.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have like a German breakfast where they're eating deli meats for breakfast,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mm-hmm.
two opposite ends
Yeah.
of kind of like one's all protein and one's all carbs.
Yeah. And I think if you think of that immediate source of energy of like lumberjacking too, the way that you put it, because I remember those commercials too, where it's an immediate source of energy. So grain-based foods are part of, globally speaking, are part of traditional cultural foods because back in the day, we were out there tilling the soil and we were doing lots of manual labor and it's an immediate source of energy. So nowadays, when you think of carbo loading, you think of people who are maybe doing marathons, right? So they're eating like a large spaghetti
Right.
dinner
Right.
so that they can go for a run because your body's going to need an immediate source of that. So it can depend on how you're executing what your needs are. So as an example, kind of related to what you're talking about there, when it comes to people who do work out, if they are doing something more cardio based, like they're going for a run or they're running on a treadmill or they're going biking or something that requires endurance for their body to be quick at something, that would be maybe start off with a more carb dense meal as your first meal because you're going to need that energy immediately. Versus if somebody's doing something like strength training, bodybuilding, weightlifting, that would be after the fact of a post-workout meal to help with repairing any of the muscle tears in the muscles. So that would be a more protein dense, like a protein smoothie is fine, but maybe a protein source like a chicken sandwich or something like that, within 30 to 60 minutes after working out to help with repairing the needs of your body. So again, very individualized approach, very different needs, and not all rules apply to the same kind of people or
Right.
to different
Right.
people. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Matthew. I know I was going to say, Karen says, I usually eat steel cut oats with a tiny bit of protein powder. Yep, exactly. It could be, Karen. It depends on what your needs are. As a general rule, I think, I forget what the conversion is in imperial units, but in the metric world, it's 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And I think anywhere between something like 50 to 150 grams of protein per day could suffice most people. But that's why I like what you said with the protein powder. Like, I don't eat meat. I eat fish, but I don't eat other kinds of meat. It's hard for me to be just like stack upon stack upon stack of just fish all the time. I just can't. And plus, there's mercury discussions around that too. Same thing with chicken breast or red meat. Like some people just can't physically eat that much. So I think if you're getting a little bit of everything in variety, and don't forget too, there's protein in plant foods as well. There's protein in broccoli, there's protein in nuts, there's protein in beans. So again, diversifying the diet of having a little bit of everything, it's possible you'll be meeting your requirements. And if you need to do more of like a calculation and keep track of stuff, then you can really see whether or not you are getting enough protein. And or if you have access to a body scan, whether it's through a lab or a doctor or a gym, where you can see your muscle mass, or like sometimes a smart scale, not super accurate, but a smart scale too can show you body fat and water content in your body, and muscle mass to say whether or not you're depleting and you might need some extra in that sense too. But I think adding protein powder is totally fine. I wouldn't say use that for, like, I like to focus first on whole foods and then the supplemental type of things, but I'm the same way. Sometimes I'll throw protein powder and stuff. I think I even did it once in coffee and I didn't love that, but I don't mind it in things like oatmeal or in my smoothie. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Karen. Right. So sometimes our body is just naturally trying to rest and digest. That's the whole point of rest and digest. And it's very, person specific. If you're the type of person who needs a little bit more time to digest certain things, or depending on the combination of foods, it depends on what your body's mechanisms are, that it might make you feel sleepy after you eat. So I tend to recommend, again, if you are medically cleared to do that, because this also helps with blood sugar regulation. After every meal, do something, move your body in however you can. It helps with getting the insulin into the cells. It helps stabilizing the blood sugar. And there's actually research for people who are managing type 2 diabetes or diabetes of any kind, that even a 5 or 10 minute burst of movement immediately following a meal can help with stabilizing their blood sugar spikes. So by nature, when we eat something, our blood sugar goes up, and it's supposed to come down pretty smoothly. But in people with insulin resistance or diabetes, it might not, it might spike and take a really long time to drop. But physical activity, whether it's marching in place, going for a walk around the block, whatever it is, getting yourself up and active. And so in your case too, if you feel super sleepy and you feel like you want to, maybe move around and kind of get that energy and that blood going. Maybe you feel that you feel more active or more alert after the fact, if that's an option for you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Questions, comments, or feedback? I'm scrolling through right now. Hi, everybody. Look at, wow, you do have a lot of people. We were saying before, it's summertime. We weren't sure if everybody's gonna be here or not, so it's nice to see some of the familiar names, like Dilcia, hello, and Glendani, hello, Catherine again. Hi, everybody. Giovanna, hello. Hi, Catherine.
Yeah,
Karen,
we had a
hi.
good turnout. A lot of the
Aline,
centers are here.
Jessica. Yeah, this is great.
Now, I wonder, Dina, if you, I like this topic, if you would ever consider something like dealing with like 3 o'clock hunger pangs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that goes towards anytime I hear anybody saying they either get hunger pangs or they're fatigued, like they start having a crash at a certain time. My first question is always, did you eat enough? Did you eat enough? And was it well-rounded? So I think, gone are the days of like it has to be 3 square meals and 2 snacks. I barely eat 3 meals because I eat kind of heartily, but I also my body just naturally, I feel like my appetite is a little bit less in the evening, and I'm also an early bird, so I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and by nature I tend to eat about 7:30 in the morning, about 12 to 2 p.m. midday, and then maybe my latest time I would eat towards the end of the evening is 6 o'clock. Like I usually eat between 4:30 to 6. So even if I'm awake later, I'm not eating towards the end of the night, and I'm okay with it. And if I don't have enough to eat as far as the 3 times that I am eating, then maybe I'll grab a handful of nuts or some popcorn or a yogurt, and I'll stir some nut butter in there. So again, recognizing that everybody's different, what their needs are, how physically active or not active they are, you might notice patterns. So I think recommending what I said before, when you have your meal of any kind, just set a timer. Just be like, let me check in on myself in about 2.5 to 3 hours. I might need to have a handful of something, especially if I know I'm not going to eat again for another, 6 hours before my next meal. I might want to just grab a little something, and the choices you make. So, usually what happens around that time too is people get a little snacky and they don't make the best choices. But I would also just say it depends on who you are. If you feel like there's flexibility and there's no judgment or guilt around having a little sweet treat or something fun or grabbing some chips or whatever, that's okay. But in the grand scheme of things, are you meeting the needs of what your body needs? Are you prioritizing your health if you're dealing with certain chronic conditions? And are you investing in whatever is in with your control that meets the goals that you want as an outcome? So, I'm very much into all foods fit. I like flexibility and freedom in making choices, but I also recognize I don't want to be too indulgent with certain things. Do you find yourself crashing certain times, Matthew? Is that what you were asking too? Kind of getting like the 3 o'clock hangry?
Yeah, it's like I might go for a protein bar or something.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, something small. But again, a couple hundred calories of that, and it's mostly protein or whatever the ratio is, that could last you another couple of hours before you get another meal. And
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for that. Giovanna, we actually did a whole webinar, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like maybe it was last year or the beginning of this year. I can't remember how long ago it was, of inflammation. I think it was last year. And so if it's available on the PSS YouTube channel, you could check it out in full. But my recommendations for inflammation are usually being very conscientious of what are inflammatory foods for you. So it's a very individual thing too. If you're dealing with certain things that you have triggers for, like not necessarily allergies, but sensitivities to things like spicy food or citrus things, like whatever it is that you feel is giving yourself a reaction, that's one thing. In the more processed sense, anything that's going to be like alcohol or high fat, high sugar, high salt content of things, so a lot of takeout foods could be considered inflammatory. And then in the non-food world, this is also a great time to recognize, am I vibrating always on high energy frequency? Am I stressing out a ton? Because on a cellular level, your body's going to feel inflamed, and it could also affect the gut-brain axis, like your little factory of the good bacteria in your gut could be affected by either food sources or chronic stress or sleep erratic sleep patterns, and that can put you at risk for immune issues. So inflammation sometimes ties into, now I'm always more prone to getting sick, or when I do get sick, it's harder for me to recover. So I'm not sure if you want to clarify a little bit more, or just like the general suggestions that I just recommended, if that's helpful for your question about inflammation. Yeah, that's a very, very personal thing. Like, a lot of people don't even realize they might be inflamed, but they notice things like, I'm always sick, or I'm always struggling with this, or I have, phlegm in the back of my throat, or I can't recover from an injury or an illness. And it's possible that their body is not is inflamed in that sense, which just basically means different white blood cells and different mechanisms are on alert. Like, the soldiers are constantly out for battle, and it's like, you got to calm down. So how are we calming that down? It's usually through, food modifications, or recognizing if stress could be an indicator in that sense as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
Okay,
Jessica.
thank you for answering that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Giovanna.
no, for me, it's definitely under with stress. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
definitely a
Easier said than
major
done, right?
trigger. Yes.
Yeah, easier said than done. Sometimes stuff is, when it comes to these discussions too, I always think of, how do we set boundaries with ourselves and with others? So is it uncomfortable but necessary conversations to have with people around you, that you're like, look, I need to focus on my own self-care, and I can't be dealing with this drama anymore? Or if it's something that, I can't quit my job, like my job is causing me stress, but how do I compartmentalize that? Okay, I'm going to stop at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and just go home. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm going to communicate. I'm going to get a support system of people around me that or I can go to therapy, like different things that can help support your whatever health needs that you have. But again, it's easier said than done sometimes. Just be like, oh, don't stress about it. We're always stressing about something. So hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, like even setting up routines for yourself. I think we talked about this in we had a mindful techniques discussion a while back too. 5 minutes of just like staring off in the distance, doing some breathing exercises, going outside in the, nature and fresh air of New York City, however we define that. Just giving your brain a break. I hope that that's helpful, Giovanna, and for all of us too, just to kind of recognize that. Thank you, Glendani. Yeah, I figured I needed to give us all a break from the organ systems. I thought, let's simplify some of the conversation. And this is also fun because maybe, just like anything, when you see food pictures, I think it inspires you to think a little bit outside the box, like we were just saying, or see how you might want to do things differently, and then just also gauge. Like I showed you with my plan. Like, sometimes it works, sometimes I stay on top of it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I fall off track with things, and then I have to go back and say, that's because I forgot to whatever, shop ahead of time, take time for myself, prepare. And it just kind of lets you recommit and reassess what your needs are, and and reflect on all of that too, because we are always a work in progress. And especially with life cycle too, Matthew, I didn't mention that. Life cycle too, like, there's a saying that every 7 years your body chemistry changes, and there's some kind of truth to that, where you might notice different things happening.
Mhm.
Wear and tear on your body, you're taking different medicines, whether or not you're in menopause, like different things are going to happen, and your body is going to, the chemistry is going to change. The bacteria in your gut is going to change. Like, all of these things are going to affect your mood, your concentration, your physical and mental well-being. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks everybody. Have a good summer. Bye.